Welcome to Sideboard Sunday. Today we're going to look at Affinity and how to sideboard against the other main decks in the format. We're going to look at the top 5 decks referred to by meta numbers and we're going to see how to sideboard against those decks. So we're just going to run through real quick exact cards in, exact cards out. So let's look at the first deck, Affinity. How do we sideboard in the mirror? The Affinity mirror is a very tricky time where Steel Overseer and Master of Ethereum are at a premium. So whoever gets a Steel Overseer game 1 normally wins the game. Edge Champion is very bad in this matchup. So what we're going to do for sideboarding is we're going to bring in more cards to break the mirror. So we want to bring in Bitter Blossom. Bitter Blossom is not a very common sideboard card in Affinity, but I like to run it in my version. It is really good in the mirror. It creates many chump blockers as well as many flyers that you can equip with cranial plating to give a +2. I also really like Gearport Aether Grid. Gearport Aether Grid is something that it can ping down all of your guys. You can keep them. You can almost play like a prison type style in the mirror, and they just never will have guys. And you can even ping down a Steel Overseer if deployed early enough. The last card I like to bring in is Ancient Grudge. Not destroying 1, but 2 artifacts in the mirror is a huge thing. So I really like that. So the 5 cards I would bring in would be 2 Gearport Aether Grids, 2 Ancient Grudges, and 1 Bitter Blossom. Now what to cut is the question. I like to cut 3 Edge Champions. Those cards are very bad. The only thing it blocks well is Master of Ethereum. Otherwise, it is a very poor card in the mirror. Also, Signal Pest is not a very good card. Signal Pest is an 0-1, so it does not attack well. It also does not block flying creatures. Flying creatures are very important in the mirror. So I like to take out 2 Signal Pests and 3 Edge Champion for 1 Bitter Blossom, 2 Ancient Grudge, and 2 Gearport Aether Grid. Let's move on to the next deck, Burn. Burn is a pretty decent matchup. We have our main board interaction. We have some Vault Scourges as well as removal spells and a quick clock to get them done. But then after sideboard, we get some nice cool tools to the matchup. We get 2 Spellskite, not only blocking but also protecting our largest threat and redirecting burn spells. This Spellskite does it all. So we're going to bring in 2 Spellskite. We also like Spell Pierce in the matchup. When they go at turn 2 Searing Blaze, being able to Spell Pierce their Searing Blaze is a huge tempo swing. Or also Spell Piercing a Destructive Revelry. So I like bringing in the 2 Spellskites and the 3 Spell Pierce. Now what to cut? This is the sideboard that I like to cut. This is a little tricky because most of your cards are very good in the matchup. I usually like trimming 1 Memnite. I do this very commonly. I think trimming 1 Memnite is a very good practice. Since, especially in this matchup where it's not going to be attacking well. I also like trimming the Master of Ethereum since it gets blown out by Destructive Revelry, and it's not a very good trade, as well as they might bring in Paths and Deflecting Palm. So, and for that reason, I also like bringing out 1 Edge Champion, since they might have more Skullcracks and more Deflecting Palms after sideboard. I think that bringing out these 2 is fine, as well as a Memnite. And I like cutting 2 Steel Overseers. While being a huge card if it survives on the board, Steel Overseer is mostly a blowout and does not really impact the board too much. I would just rather have the Spellskites in the 2 mana slot. That wraps up the Burn matchup. So let's move to Eldrazi-tron. Huge deck right now. This deck, well, Edge Champion is really bad against Eldrazi-tron. So let's take all 3 of those out. Now what do we bring in instead? We bring in 1 Dispel to remove some of their threats, and 2 Thoughtseize to disrupt them. Now, the question is, why not bring in the Blood Moon? The answer is, your creature lands are very important in the matchup. Being able to have a creature land that is not easily answered, except by, well, I guess a lot of things. Warping Whale, or Walking Ballista to be common. Ways to remove it. But Thoughtseize is a really good way to disrupt them. Get out there, Walking Ballista. Walking Ballista is a very hard card to beat. And you really want to replace these Edge Champions since they do basically nothing in the matchup. So Etch Champion is one of those cards that's either swingy, it's either the best, or it's the worst card in a matchup. So let's move on to Abzan. Abzan. It's a rough matchup. They have Lingering Souls. They also have Stony Silence after Sideboard. I like bringing in, let's talk about what we bring in first. I like bringing in 2 Gearport Aether Grids. Not only can this card be activated through Stony Silence, it can also ping down Lingering Soul tokens to be able to attack. You can also just ping down your opponent and kill them. So I like bringing in 2 Aether Grid. I also like bringing in 1 Etch Champion. Now, there is an argument to bring in a Blood Moon against Abzan, since they aren't really able to cast spells. And I can see that argument. But I am not of that camp. Blood Moon I usually bring in against other decks, such as like Sultai. This is a perfectly good matchup to bring in against, and I can see the argument for that. But I like bringing in these 3 cards. And I like taking out 1 Memnite. As we said, we want these powerful threats. 1 Galvanic Blast, since there's not too many things you need to answer, and you're bringing in some colored cards, so it's going to be tough. And 1 Master of Ethereum, since they have Path to Exile. Now, if you are going to bring in the Blood Moon, I suggest cutting 1 Steel Overseer, since Steel Overseer doesn't fight through Stony, and it's also answered by Path and Push. So if you want to bring in the Blood Moon, which is actually very good reasoning. If you play against a good Abzan player, they will play around Blood Moon and they'll get basics. But sometimes they do not, and you can get them with the Blood Moon. Now let's look at our last matchup for the day. Our matchup will be Death Shadow Aggro. This deck has been just destroying tournaments lately. And so how do we sideboard against it? How do we beat this Death Shadow Aggro deck? Well, first of all, it's a bad matchup. But how do we beat it after board? Let's side in 1 additional Etch Champion. They are a grindy Jund deck that with a faster win con. And Etch Champion also blocks their Death Shadow and other threats as well. We can also bring in 2 Spellskite. While not being the combo deck that Death Shadow Aggro used to be, Spellskite is still good since they have so much removal, and it nerfs their Kolaghan's Command, and it can jump for a turn, and it can redirect certain removal spells. I like bringing in the Spellskites. And I like removing 1 Memnite, 1 Master of Ethereum, since you don't Kolaghan's Command blowouts, and 1 Steel Overseer, since we need to be a little bit fast, but we still don't. Like, Steel Overseer is usually just removable by Push, or Bolt, or Kolaghan's Command. So that's my sideboarding for the top 5 decks of the meta. So I hope you enjoyed the sideboard guide, and hope to see you next time.